Chapter 7 Emerald Avatar March 3rd, 2086 Uninhabited Wilderness, Michigan. Cassandra recovered, somewhat, and was able to get back inside the APC. The vehicle moved out again, this time moving slowly, following the river downstream. In the passenger area, Cassandra was shivering as though she was cold, but her body was hot to the touch. This time, however, it was a different kind of heat. "She's got a fever," Inez reported to Varian and Jay. "She really is sick." Varian narrowed his or her eyes and asked if Cassandra still had the medicine bottle she dropped in the Schwartz Creek cave. Inez fetched it and brought it back into the turret. Varian inspected the bottle while the aliens speculated. "Childhood illness is common where I'm from," Quarter Ling said, "especially among hybrids like me." "She doesn't look like a hybrid," Inez pointed out. "Neither do I," Kingi replied. "Yet here I am, half Ashurian and half Partogan. Hybrids don't all look like Quarter, you know. We can appear to be wholly of one species." Inez conceded this was possible, and when that thought crossed her mind, it was followed by another. "Let's say she is a hybrid then. Could she have the Fade?" Inez directed the question towards Quarter and Kingi. The two hybrids frowned in thought. The Fade was a degenerative disease that only affected human-alien hybrids, usually caused by incompatible DNA. Of the two hybrids currently sitting on top of the ABC, the only one vulnerable to the Fade was Quarter. She shook her head. "You can't treat the Fade with pills," she explained. "You need a full regimen of genetic therapy. That takes years, and this kid wouldn't have been able to move out of a clinic while it was happening. No way, not the Fade." "So, what else could it be?" Setla, the giant Mycor, spoke up. "Forgive me," he said in his deep, booming voice. "I'm not too familiar with human physiology, but that young one looks old enough to have started her reproductive cycle. Perhaps the pills are birth control." Inez shook her head. "No, I don't think so," she told the group. "I use birth control. Get the pills from a gene therapy clinic. The pills are blue and shaped like ovals. Cassandra's pills were red capsules." Everyone went back to thinking. Finally, Varian spoke up. "Someone go down below and ask Cassandra what all of her symptoms are. I'll pass them along to Uplink when we get into radio range." Inez went back down into the passenger area and found Cassandra resting in Sarah's lap. She was having cold sweats now, gripping her stomach and grimacing in pain. "It feels like my gut's gonna explode," Cassandra complained. "What else happens when you're sick?" Inez asked. "Your stomach? Fever? Anything else?" Embarrassed, Cassandra whispered the answer. "It hurts to go to the bathroom." Inez didn't wait for anyone to ask her. As soon as she clambered back into the turret, she proclaimed, "She's got a bug." "What? You mean like a bug bit her?" Quarter asked. No, Inez replied. "I meant she caught an infection, a virus or something." "How?" Varian said. "I thought Advent wiped out all of the viruses on Earth with the original gene therapy clinics." "They tried," Jay corrected her. Or him. "There were millions of people who hid out in the wilderness and never went to one of those damn clinics. Plenty of diseases from the old world are still around, just nowhere near as prevalent as they used to be. So, let's think. What old world diseases could our little friend have picked up?" "I learned about a bunch of different types of viruses in school," Varian said. Rhinovirus, coronavirus, adenovirus, enterovirus, but I thought they were all exterminated by Advent." A loud cracking sound issued from Varian's belt, and a voice came out of the radio receiver. "Inez, this is Uplink. We see you on visual. Come out of the trees and we'll drop the gate for you." Inez turned around to look where the APC was going. They had come to an unusual spot in the forest. The trees thinned out, and the spaces between them were filled with... At first, it was difficult to tell what was in the open spaces between the trees. Inez thought they were great heaps of dirt, covered in shrubbery and small plants. But then, as they drew closer, she realized she was looking at something completely different. It was the ruins of a small city, completely overgrown with plant life. The town, abandoned some 70 years ago, had been completely reclaimed by nature, with small hills and mounds marking the spots where man-made structures had once been. The city itself was built on the spot where 3 highways converged, and the path of the roadways was still somewhat visible, as no large trees had grown there yet. A building that looked like it might have been the city hall had slid down the embankment of the river and been partially washed away, while the wreckage of a hydroelectric dam was turned into a waterfall by the river itself. What was once a grand-looking hospital could only be identified by a road sign. Trees were growing out of all the windows. In the center of the ruined city, there was an open space where 2 highways met in a large intersection, and it was here that the person called Uplink was waiting. A space plane had landed in the clearing, pointing south along one of the highways. It was a long vessel with triangular wings and 4 engines, 2 on the back of the fuselage and 1 on each wing. From here, Inez couldn't make out any more details, but Varian told her. "That's our ship, the USS Niagara. We'll take you to our friends in Alpena. We've got medicine there. You and Cassandra should be safe there until we figure out our next move." By the time Varian, Jay, Inez, and the others reached the spaceplane, dark and ominous clouds were rolling in. Inez sniffed and picked up the smell of ozone. "Varian, I think it's going to rain," she said. "You're right," he or she replied. Varian put 1 foot on the spaceplane's boarding ramp and yelled to whoever was in the cockpit. "Shut down the engines! We can't take off in this weather!" With a dull whine, all 4 of the Niagara's engines fell silent. Then Inez could hear a voice coming from inside. "I'm really starting to hate this part of Earth. The weather here is terrible for flying." A man stepped down the boarding ramp to join the others. Inez looked at him and felt an extremely powerful lurch in her stomach. There was no doubt about it anymore. She definitely had a thing for aliens. Or maybe this alien in particular. The man who had spoken was a tall and slender Partogan. He had the dark skin, purple eyes, and silvery white hair shared by all members of his species, but he had a face that any human woman would love to be seen hanging out with. Long and rectangular, the Partogan's face featured a strong chin and narrow eyes hidden behind a set of smart glasses. A digital screen was faintly visible in both lenses, shaded beneath his long silver bangs. Finally, the sight of short stubble on his cheeks and chin made Inez feel hot under the collar. The Partogan clasped Varian's hand before giving him, or her, a quick hug. "Heard you got into a firefight," the Partogan said. "I told you Kingi's not one for stealth." "Since when does that matter, Maui?" Kingi snarked. Inez's brain restarted itself. "So, your name's Maui?" "Maui Ririnui." The Partogan gave Inez a casual glance that nearly melted her heart. "And this is Nainu Dokunle." Inez looked around for a moment before Jay pointed at her feet. A reptilian alien, not quite 2 feet tall, was looking up at her with big gecko-like eyes and a completely unimpressed expression on its face. "So you're Professor Espinosa's kid, huh?" Nainu spoke in a high-pitched voice due to his size. "About time. Come on, we're making camp at the library across the street until the weather clears up. We'll see if we can do something for your friend." Leaving the Niagara behind, The group of 6 Stormbreakers, 4 Wolverines, and 2 fugitives made their way into the shell of a structure. A century ago, this place would have been a 2-story library, but the insides of the building were long since gutted, and now only the brick and mortar skeleton remained. Inside, a thicket of trees growing from the basement had grown straight through the roof, poking their many branches out of the windows. There was a mostly clear spot, and judging from the way the grass and the shrubbery were beaten down, this was normally a hiding spot for animals. Several of the Wolverines gathered small pieces of wood, and Piper used her laser pistol to start a fire. Outside, the sun was setting, and with a gentle pitter-patter, cold rain started to fall. Shielded beneath a battered old roof and great old trees, everybody sat down. Looking around the group, Inez got the feeling that everybody was having strong feelings about this gathering. The Stormbreakers, in general, were giving off a sense of cautious optimism. By contrast, the Wolverines all had an aura of people who were wondering whether they had made a terrible mistake. The 2 reptiles, Setla and Nainu, curled up next to the fire. "No reptile in their right mind would ever live in Michigan," Nainu declared with a shiver. "How could any cold-blooded person survive here?" "It gets really hot here in the summer," Inez said. "Very hot, actually. Anyway, Bannack is further north. I'm sure Cassandra would back me up if she wasn't asleep." The little girl was wrapped in blankets next to the fire, her face pressed into Quarter's furry chest. Cassandra took deep breaths and was certainly out like a light. "So, is she out for the night?" Lawrence asked. "What did you give her, Uplink?" Maui Riri Nui reached into his pocket and produced Cassandra's medicine bottle. "Did any of you even bother to read the label?" he said. "These were antiviral pills. I gave her the minimum dose of antivirals we had on board, and she started recovering within the hour. She should be fine by morning." Inez punched the air in triumph. "Aha!" she declared. "I was right! I knew it!" "Okay, so Cassandra's got a virus," Quarter said. "Do we know what kind of virus? Is it contagious? Should I be letting her touch me?" The half-lioness was clearly eager for Cassandra to stop using her as a pillow. Quarter's tail flicked in agitation. "Hold on a moment," Setla said. The giant Mycor turned himself around in order to warm the other side of his flank by the fire. "Cassandra said, and I'm sorry, you said your name was Inez? These 2 have been traveling together all day. If the younger one is contagious, the older one should have gotten sick by now." Everybody turned to look at Inez. She looked down at the fire in a sheepish kind of way. I honestly thought you guys would have the answers, you know? My dad told me to find you, to bring Cassandra to you." There was another moment of silence. "Professor Espinosa was right," Varian finally said. "Listen, Inez, fact is, we've been working with your dad on something really important for a while now. And from the beginning, we actually wanted you to be a part of the mission," Quarter added. "But things happened." Inez felt her heartbeat quicken. Perhaps now she would finally get some answers. Looking around the firelit group, she said, "What's going on, anyway? Why is the UN after my dad? How did my mom die? And what does Cassandra have to do with any of this?" Everybody looked at one another, as though they were unsure where to start. Finally, Lawrence stood up and crossed the room to sit down next to Inez. She relaxed. She knew Lawrence and trusted him. It would be easier to take things in if he was the one explaining. Perhaps he knew that. "Inez, you've got to understand," Lawrence began. "What's going on here is so much bigger than you, or me, or all of us. The fact that you're completely out of the loop makes this so much harder to explain." 2 years ago, Varian said, We were all chosen for a very important mission. Lawrence took Inez's hand in his own. You were chosen, Varian added. You were supposed to be with us from the start. Inez's mouth went dry. She could barely speak the next question. Chosen for what? Inez never heard the answer. At that moment, there was a loud creaking noise from the ceiling. Dust, leaves, and rainwater fell to the ground. From high up and outside the building, a voice shouted, "Here they are!" Without hesitating for a second, the Wolverines and Stormbreakers reached for their weapons. Rifles, submachine guns, pistols, and knives, and even a sword flashed into the dark evening light before someone doused the fire, filling the campsite with smoke. But it was too late. The deep thundering of an aircraft engine was starting to overpower the noise of the rain outside. Lawrence and Sarah both grabbed Inez and forced her to lay flat on the ground. A moment later, Cassandra joined her. The little girl was awake and crying. "What's happening?" Cassandra gasped. "Get down!" Jay hissed. "The roof!" Setla pointed his rotary plasma cannon towards the ceiling. "There's someone on the roof!" Crash! A massive section of the dilapidated rooftop was suddenly pulled up and away, letting the rainstorm thunder into the ruined library. As leaves and branches fell to the ground, the Stormbreakers and Wolverines raised their weapons, taking aim at the two figures standing on the splintered rafters. Inez felt a pang of horror as she recognized one of them. Yasen Ackerman was there. He was now wearing a suit of power armor that featured a built-in grappling hook. Above him, a tilt-rotor military aircraft was hovering above the wrecked library, its bay doors open. Varian struck first. He, or she, took aim with a laser rifle and fired at Yasen, but laser weapons are known to suffer from accuracy issues during rainstorms. Varian's shot went wide, and Yasen gestured to his comrade. A second UN soldier pointed a spindly-looking contraption down at the group. No, he was aiming at Cassandra! Thinking fast, Inez scrambled to her hands and knees. She grabbed Cassandra around the middle and would have started running, but all around her the sounds of gunfire erupted as battle began. Something big and heavy hit Inez in the back, sending her to the ground again as the Stormbreakers and Wolverines scattered. "Maui!" Varian shouted. "Fire up the Niagara and turn the autocannons loose!" "Lawrence!" Jay yelled. "They're taking the girls! Grab hold and don't let go!" Now this was when Inez realized exactly what she'd been hit with. Both she and Cassandra were tangled up in multiple nets. Heavy weights had swung around Inez at impact, hopelessly tangling themselves up and making escape even more difficult. And on top of all this, the nets were attached to something pulling her and Cassandra away from the group. Both girls screamed and grabbed at anything to stop the moving net. Cassandra seized a tree branch and held until it broke. Inez found Lawrence's hand and the two held each other tight. Meanwhile, the net itself had been attached to a winch, and the UN Army aircraft was thrusting its engines, pulling the net inexorably up and away. All around, a gunfight erupted as more UN soldiers came out of hiding. The camp was surrounded. With a loud roar, Setla blasted two soldiers with his plasma cannon, sending their blue helmets flying through the air. Then he turned his weapon against the enemy aircraft. Seeing plasma bolts striking the hull of his airship, Yasen sprang into action as soon as the capture net was raised to roof level. He and another soldier reached inside and tried to grab Cassandra. "We don't need the blonde!" Yasen shouted to his man. "Just get the little one!" Inez grabbed Cassandra with both hands and held on for dear life. She lashed out with her feet, kicking at any part of Yasen she could reach. In one blow, she managed to find Yasen's left hand. With a swift follow-up, Inez felt a crunching sensation, followed by a shrill scream. She had broken at least one of Yasen's fingers. Meanwhile, Cassandra was panicking. The little girl screamed and shrieked so shrilly, Inez thought she would go deaf. A big, burly UN soldier reached into the net and grabbed Cassandra's hair. He started tugging on it violently with one hand, and with the other, he found Inez and punched her in the face. She wasn't going to hold on much longer. Inez cried out for help. "Lawrence! Varian!" "Come on!" the UN soldier yelled. "Give it up! Give me the girl!" Cassandra was now freaking out, and as she lost control, her body started superheating again. Rain fell on Cassandra, and steam rose from her body. "Stop! Leave me alone! Don't touch me!" A light flickered, not like the flash of a gun muzzle, nor was it like the flash of a bolt of lightning. Inez had seen it, and it terrified her. A laser bolt sailed dangerously close to the net, and there was a strangled cry from down below. Somebody had just been shot. Inez called out, "Lawrence, help us!" Now there were 2 UN soldiers tugging on Cassandra, trying to separate her from Inez. The capture net was now touching the boarding ramp of the UN airship. Inez could feel the jet wash from the engines. It was all going to be over in a few seconds. The UN soldier tugged on Cassandra's hair one last time. "Come with us now!" he yelled. "Don't make me hurt you!" "I'll kill you!" Cassandra screamed. "Don't touch me again! I'll kill you all!" And then it happened again. A series of lights flashed on and off within Cassandra's body, as though a thunderstorm was building up inside of her. The flashing light was so intense that Inez could see all of Cassandra's bones. Inez tried to say something, to cry out a word of warning, but it was too late. A UN soldier reached into the net and grabbed Cassandra by the throat. It all happened in about 3 seconds. First, there was a flash of green light, brighter than the sun. Inez jammed her eyes shut, as did everyone else. Next, Inez picked up on the sound of rushing water, or was it air? Something was racing very quickly to be somewhere else. That was for certain. Finally, every person in the immediate area, including Inez, was filled with an overwhelming sense of impending doom. Inez opened her eyes and found a horrible scene before her. She had fallen out of the net and was lying on the rooftop. The VTOL aircraft was pulling up and away, trying to escape. UN soldiers, Stormbreakers, and Wolverines alike were all backing off, their weapons lowered to the ground. Cassandra was gone. In her place, brilliant and terrible, was a translucent, human-shaped entity made from a dark green, semi-corporeal substance. The green figure flickered and wavered as though it was constantly phasing into and out of reality. Instead of hair, electric arcs shot up from the skull. It turned its head to the sky and directed its face to the aircraft above. Inez saw this thing had only eyes. 2 points of emerald starlight that seemed to burn like nuclear reactions. And then Inez realized, with a sinking sense of horror, that this monster was somehow Cassandra. The Emerald Woman turned her blazing gaze to the sky and fixed her eyes upon the fleeing aircraft. She did not move her arms. She just stared. The aircraft exploded in a ball of green flames and then crashed to the ground. UN soldiers all around panicked and threw their weapons to the ground before running away. This nightmarish version of Cassandra turned her head to gaze at each in turn. One by one, UN soldiers were immolated by green fire that seemed to come from nowhere. Inez felt sick. These guys were running away. Most of them weren't even armed. This was just plain murder. Inez scrambled to her feet and tried to grab Cassandra to force her to stop. But before she could even take a step toward her, Inez was overwhelmed and made to stop. It wasn't the heat, although Cassandra was putting out enough of that to kill a man. No, the moment Inez took a step towards Cassandra, her mind was suddenly filled with several lifetimes' worth of horrific fantasies, vile thoughts, and evil desires. It was as though the worst thoughts of the most evil people to ever live were all funneled through Inez's head at the exact same moment. Murderous intentions, jealous lust, and violent impulses clashed and merged with one another in Inez's mind, paralyzing her and leaving her stunned. In front of her, she was just barely aware of Cassandra turning her power against someone she knew. Setla roared in agony as green flames enveloped his body. "Stop!" Inez screamed at Cassandra, not knowing whether this thing could understand her. "Please, stop! This is horrible!" And then she ran at Cassandra's back. Jumping the last few feet, Inez landed squarely on the Emerald Woman's shoulders. Inez wrapped her hands around Cassandra's eyes, blocking her vision. This must have been some kind of weak spot, because the green fire attack on Setla instantly ceased. Cassandra slowly started to raise her arms, as though getting ready to dislodge Inez. Not like Inez could have held on for long, though, because Cassandra's body was hotter than a kitchen stove. Inez could feel and smell her own flesh starting to burn, and knew she would be forced to let go at any moment. "Let go, child," a gentle voice spoke just behind Inez. "I'll take it from here." An unseen force pulled Inez off Cassandra, and she collapsed onto the rooftop. Looking up, Inez saw another person had joined her on the roof. Immediately, she assumed she was hallucinating. Standing there on the roof was a woman of incomprehensible beauty. Both her skin and hair were as pure white as freshly fallen snow, and she had big, bright blue eyes. The woman wore white robes underneath a golden corset, with blue gemstones mounted on her left and right bracelets. A cape made from sheer fabric billowed behind her in the rain. Inez had never seen this person before, but she knew who it was. She had seen pictures, paintings, and stained glass windows depicting this wondrous woman. The emerald avatar of Cassandra turned around to look at the newcomer and froze. She seemed to be trying to use her green fire attack against the woman in white, but for some reason it wasn't working. The emerald avatar took a step back. The woman in white advanced. Then, with one hand, the woman in white gently touched Cassandra's forehead. It was like watching a movie played backwards. Whatever horrible transformation Cassandra went through instantly reversed itself. The green woman shrank back down to the size of a child. Her hair fell and was restored, and the translucent body became solid flesh once more. Cassandra was back to her normal self. She looked up at the woman in white for just a moment, and then her eyes rolled up, and she fell forward, unconscious. Then, as casually as if stepping across the room, the woman in white descended from the roof to the ground below. She almost seemed to float, suspended in the rain. Like Inez, the Stormbreakers and Wolverines recognized this new person. They all raised their weapons, taking aim directly at the woman in white. "It's her!" Varian shouted. "Defend yourselves!" 1 second. That was how long it took. 1 second of combat against the mightiest being in existence. The same woman who vanquished the Angelus Ethereal, slew the beast, and defeated the Paradox. It happened so fast that Inez did not see Jericho move. But the result was strewn on the ground in the form of 10 bloody and battered bodies. The Stormbreakers and their allies were left gravely wounded and just barely clinging to life.